It's time for Dirt Daily, and today we're back in the shop with the little Flatfender. Today we're going to figure out if this thing will run. Maybe not run, but if it could run. In order for an engine to run, it needs a few things. It needs compression, it needs fuel, and it needs spark. Well, in the case of this engine, it needs fuel, gasoline, spark plugs, and it needs compression. Now, we have the spark plugs. We took out old ones, we have brand new ones to put in there. So what is next? Well, let's figure out, does this thing have compression? Now, what is compression? Well, when the piston moves up inside of the cylinder of the engine, it compresses the air and fuel mixture. The air and fuel have come in through the carburetor, mixed up, and it is now in the cylinder. And as the piston comes up, it compresses that. And then, when it's getting compressed up there at hopefully 90 to 110 psi, that spark plug goes off and that sparks the fuel, which causes an explosion, internal combustion. It combusts that fuel air mixture, pushing the piston back down. The piston is attached to the crank, and the crank turns. As the crank turns, the flywheel turns, the clutch turns, the input on the transmission turns, the output on the transmission turns, the input on the transfer case turns, the output on the transfer case turns, the drive shafts turn, the ring and pinion turn, the axle shafts turn, and that turns the hubs, which turn the wheels, which turn the tires, so you can go up the trail. So, you want some compression in order to have your little Jeep go up the trail. If it doesn't have compression, there's a couple problems. One, it could be the valves. The valves are what open and close, allowing the fresh air fuel mixture in or the spent exhaust mixture out. Or it could be a problem with the pistons. Maybe they're not sealing good inside of the cylinder. We are going to use this. This is a compression tester. And it's pretty simple. There's a hose that has a little tiny O-ring and some threads. That's going to screw into the engine. And then there's a gauge at this end. And the gauge will go up and measure PSI, pounds per square inch. This engine, they say on the internet, which has got to be true, that it should have somewhere between 90 and 110 PSI. So if it has a lot less than that, there could be a problem with the engine. It could be those valves not closing and sealing tight. It could be that piston not working right. It could be a head gasket. There could be lots of reasons why it could be bad. But if it's good, then we can move on and figure out if we can get some fuel air mixture in there and some spark on it, and then all of those things will turn and we can go up the trail. So today, we're gonna do a compression test on this little engine so we can go four-wheeling. Get to work. This little Willis has a 4-cylinder engine. It's a Go Devil engine, and there are 4 holes. They have 4 spark plugs. Pretty basic stuff. Everybody should know this. I removed the spark plugs when I was trying to crank it over by hand to see if the engine would turn. We know the engine turns. I have hooked up the battery and the starter in the past. I did that on a different video, and I know that the engine will turn with the starter. In fact, I actually put a little push button in over here on the firewall, and I wired it in so that I can start the engine. So we know the engine turns. Now, we're going to screw this hose with a little O-ring into the spark plug hole. So this, we'll just thread it right down in there. The idea of the O-ring is that it will seal up against the head, and then we could pretty much just do this finger tight. It doesn't need to be wrenched down super tight. You just want that O-ring to seal. And then this has kind of a quick release on the end. So this will slide onto that hose. And now what we'll do is we'll push that button, and when we push that button, we'll watch this gauge. If the needle gets up to the green area on the gauge, that means it's pretty good. This one actually has the red to green kind of changing over right at 110, where, let me go grab the manual and we'll figure out exactly what this should be. All right, I went and got the manual. This is the Mechanics Manual, Willys Overland Motors, Toledo, Ohio, copyright 1948. And in the back of the engine section, section C, there is a table of specifications. And here we have model CJ2A, engine type L head, that's what we have. And right down here at compression, it says 110 pounds per square inch at 185 RPM. 185 RPM is basically what we're going to be cranking this over at. So we are now ready to see, let me show you this gauge again. You can see here that this gauge has like a red section that turns into a green section. Let me see if I can get the light on it just right. And we want it to be right there at 111. So this goes green at 120, and you can see basically from right at 110 is when it's going from red to green. That is because most engines, like this is basically a pretty low compression engine. So we are going to set this up, and now that we are on the number 1 cylinder, the compression tester is set up, we're going to push that start button and watch this gauge and see how the numbers move. Keep your hands and fingers out of the fan. We did good. This, I don't know if you can see it from there, it's reading right between 115 and 120. That's good. That's a good compression right there. Then you just push this button on the side and it releases it. I'm going to do it again and set up the camera nice and close so you can kind of see. Okay, we're going to watch this again. We're basically going for right up in that corner between 90 and 120. Safety glasses back on. Once again, it looks like we're right in the middle between 110 and 120. So I feel like we're doing good. Number 1 cylinder seems to be okay. So we'll back this hose out, put a spark plug in that, and then move on to the next one. Now we're going to check the compression on the number 2 cylinder. I put a spark plug in the number 1 hole. You can watch the gauge here. 90 is right where the red kind of ends, and then 120 is right where the green starts. Ooh, that looks like just shy of 100. I don't know if you can zoom in there. So that is definitely lower than the number 1 cylinder. I don't think it's low enough that it would require like this engine being torn apart and rebuilt, but we do have 2 more holes that we need to test. So number 1, much better than number 2 so far. Number 3, what's our bets? Place your bets, everybody. This is nice and tight. That's not too bad. I mean, it's pretty much the same as number 2. Sitting right just around 100 PSI. So, 4th and final. What is the number 4 hole going to get us? Oh, that's not good. Huh. Before I tell you what we're getting, I'm going to show you. Watch how the needle on this dial moves. Did you miss it? Here, I'll come in closer. Okay, you ready? So we're getting 25 PSI out of that number 4 cylinder. 110, 95 to 100 on the next two, that's fine. 25, not fine, not good. But we're going to try something else. We're going to dump a little bit of oil down that number 4 cylinder and see if that helps seal up the rings. So there's basically two options. I mean, there's more than two options, but there's probably two problems. Either one of the valves is not closing, that could be the exhaust valve or the intake valve, or, which is, if you don't understand how that works, so there's basically spring-loaded valves, and they open and close. The intake valve opens to let fresh air and fuel mixture come into the engine, and then the exhaust valve opens to let the exhaust get out. Now, if those are not closing, then you're not going to build up compression in the cylinder. The other thing is, if the rings around the exterior of the piston are broken or destroyed, or there's a problem with them, they're not going to seal up on the inside of the cylinder wall. So what we'll do is we'll put a little bit of oil down in the cylinder. That should kind of coat around the piston and hopefully, well, hopefully or not, that will either tell us if the rings are the problem or if the valve is the problem, or one of the valves, or both of the valves. So it's not unlikely that a valve is stuck open because the engine has sat for a long time, but it's also not unlikely that a ring isn't broken. So the first thing we're going to do is dump some oil in there and see if the compression goes up a lot. I'm actually hoping it's not rings and is a valve, because maybe we can work the valve loose, where the rings probably mean the whole engine needs to get torn down. Put a little bit of oil down this number 4 cylinder. They say to use about a tablespoon, which hopefully we put enough in. Then we will screw in our compression tester one more time. Let's see if it's changed. It did jump up to about 70. That tells me that we probably have a piston problem. Not ideal. All right, so put a little bit of oil down the number 4 cylinder, and our compression did go up. It went from about 25 to about 65. That tells me that the rings are probably not very good. However, there's also the possibility that maybe one of those valves that was sticking is starting to loosen up. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to let that oil kind of drain down, and then I'm also going to remove, there's a cover on the driver's side of the engine that's below like the exhaust manifold and intake manifold. And if you remove that cover, you can actually see the springs and the valves. So I'm going to remove that cover and maybe get some eyes on that. We might see if like one of the valves is stuck open on the number 4 cylinder. So we might be able to just visually see, oh, that's the problem, or part of the problem. And meanwhile, I'm going to let that oil kind of drain down, and then we will redo the compression test one more time. I really don't want to pull this engine out and rebuild it, but that may be one of our options. Actually, there's lots of options. I have another one of these engines. It's already been rebuilt, sitting on an engine stand in the corner. I have another Jeep that I started building years ago called the Garden Jeep. It was a Flatfender that I bought cheap, and it's kind of a rusty pile, and I pulled it all apart, which is not what you should do, because then it turns into a pile of parts instead of an actual running Jeep. And I had an engine built for that, and I put it on a stand, and I have never put that Jeep back together. So I could hypothetically, in fact, I even have a rebuilt transmission and transfer case for that Jeep. So I could hypothetically put all that together and put it in this Jeep and replace all this. But before we get to that point, I mean, there's also the option of like, don't replace it with another Go Devil. You could, I could put a Chevy V6 in it, a Buick V6, some other 4-cylinder. Every engine under the sun has been put under the hood of a Flatfender, whether it's a Kubota diesel or a big block or whatever. I've even seen Toyota 4-cylinders, which is blasphemy to some people, but I mean, they're pretty good engines. I've seen all of it stuffed under the hood of a Flatfender. So, but before we do that, we're going to see if those valves are moving, and we will do another compression test after the oil runs down and see, maybe we can diagnose this a little bit further. The other thing is that we could just put it together and try and run it on 3 cylinders. It would probably not be very good, but it might actually kind of put around, and then that'll just buy us more time to decide if we're doing an engine swap or an engine replacement or what we're doing. Valve cover is off. Let's see if I can get it out of here. Filthy. Let's look down in here and see what we can find. So the valves seem to be moving. I let the oil that was in that cylinder kind of drain for a little bit. And now we're going to do one more compression test on number 4. Now it's sitting right around about 55. Not ideal. So, what do we do? So, number 1 cylinder, 110 psi. Number 2 and number 3, 100 psi. Maybe 95 to 100. Number 4 was at 25. Dumped some oil down in it, cranked it over a bunch more times. We got it up to 65. Checked the valve, removed the valve cover, and we could see the valves moving on number 4. So I feel like it's probably not the valves. I feel like it's probably the piston, which is unfortunate because that probably means we need to pull that piston, put some new rings on it. Maybe that's an easy job. Maybe we just do rings. But I kind of want to move forward with fuel pump and ignition and see if we can make this thing run. Sure, it's only going to really run right on maybe 3, but rather than pull the engine and put another one in, even though I have that other one on the engine stand, and rather than swapping in something else, because I have other Jeeps that have swapped in engines, I kind of want to just keep plugging away at this one. Is it a waste of time? Yeah, but is it fun? Definitely. So, next time, fuel pump. See if we can pump any fuel out of this thing, and maybe some ignition. All right, that's it for this Dirt Daily. We didn't get what we wanted, but we got what we got. We'll see you guys next time.